Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere a little grim. But don't worry, you're already doomed. You stand in the dim hush of an early autumn evening. The air sour with drifting smoke from hearth fires and the faint perfume of fermenting rice. Ahead of you squats a weathered wooden inn. Its low eaves dripping rain like a sad apology. The sliding door yawns open just enough to reveal a yellow glow and the shape of someone watching. A worn sign creaks overhead, the characters declaring this a respectable place, though the frayed Tommy mats peeking through the doorway argue otherwise. You shift your bundle of belongings to the other shoulder, feeling every ache from the road as you wonder whether this was truly the best choice. You probably won't survive this meal with your pride intact, but it's far too late to turn back. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're feeling brave, comment below with your location and what time it is as you drift into this little experiment in discomfort. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, you duck your head as you step across the threshold. A young woman in a faded kimono bows just enough to show she's noticed your arrival, though her eyes have the weary glaze of someone who has seen 100 travelers this week alone. You can almost hear her internal sigh as she gestures toward a low counter stained with decades of spilled broth. Your feet find the cold wood floor, which creaks as though to remind you you're not welcome to linger too long without spending something. You're handed a slip of paper marked with an inscrutable scroll that presumably records your right to be here. It feels oddly ceremonial, like signing away your evening to the whims of rice farmers and fishmongers you've never met. Behind the counter, a pot bubbles over a charcoal brazier. You smell miso paste sharply salty, mixed with the more delicate bitterness of green onions and something else that might be fish or perhaps just an old rag warming in the corner. It's hard to tell, and you're too tired to care. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so are your neighbors, if you think about it long enough. A man emerges from a back room wearing a robe several sizes too large. He spares you a glances, though measuring whether you are likely to pay your bill. Satisfied or merely resigned, he shuffles away to retrieve a shallow basin of water. He sets it on a lacquered tray and nods with the solemnity of an undertaker. This, apparently, is your welcome ritual, the ceremonial offering of tepid water to wash away the grime of the road, or at least to make you feel momentarily civilized before surrendering to the chaos of dinner. You settle your bundle against the nearest post and bend over the basin. The water is lukewarm and smells faintly of iron, and as you splash it over your calloused hands, you realize this is as clean as you're going to get tonight. Remember that damp tunic from your last lodging? It's still clinging to your shoulders, sour and persistent, a reminder that hygiene in this world is a process, never a destination. The woman in the faded kimono hovers just close enough to make you feel watched, but not so near that you can ask her anything. Her presence is a kind of silent pressure. You are expected to proceed, to perform the rituals of politeness, even though you'd rather just crawl into a pile of straw and forget supper altogether. But hunger insists, gnawing through your reluctance, and you straighten your spine with all the dignity you can muster. She slides the door to an inner chamber open with a practiced sweep, and the aroma thickens with smoke, fish stock, and the faint sweetness of boiled millet. The room is small, the walls hung with faded scrolls depicting scenes you don't recognize. One shows a crane standing on one leg in a pond. Another shows a man in armor who probably never sat cross-legged on a damp mat waiting for scraps of dried fish. You can almost hear him judging you. The tatami mats look soft from a distance, but reveal themselves as tired and slightly prickly as you approach. You imagine 1,000 other travelers settling here before you, sharing the day's dust inexactly. This spot, and you feel both comforted and vaguely unsettled. You lower yourself onto the mat with care, knees cracking in protest. The lacquered tray from the front room has reappeared, this time bearing a small cup of sake and a square cloth that might be your napkin or your final shout. It's difficult to say. You feel the eyes of the host again as he appears in the doorway, arms folded in an attitude of polite skepticism. He doesn't speak, only inclines his head just enough to let you know it's time to begin. You take up the cup of sake with hands that still smell of old iron water. The liquid is cloudy, and when you tip it against your lip, it tastes like a fermented dare. You swallow carefully and set it back on the tray. The woman brings another tray laden with tiny dishes, pale pickles you can't identify, slices of something that might be daikon but could be fish belly, and a cluster of rice. Cakes dusted with something suspiciously green. Your stomach is both hopeful and afraid. Historians still argue whether these offerings were truly intended as a feast or simply a test of your endurance. One by one, you range the little bowls round you, trying to look as though you've done this 100 times. The lacquer gleams in the lamplight, reflecting your uncertain hands. A draft curls through the doorway behind you, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth, and for a moment, you almost wish you were out there again, walking endlessly rather than navigating this delicate ritual of sustenance. A soft laugh echoes. From the other side of the partition, someone finds something amusing. Perhaps it's the sight of yet another traveler pretending they know which dish to start with. You suspect your performance is transparent, but you keep moving, plucking up a morsel with your chopsticks and lifting it to your mouth. It tastes sour and crunchy, not unpleasant, though you can't shake the feeling that you've just consumed a century of pickling. Outside, the rain taps against the eaves, a patient percussion that seems determined to accompany every uncertain bite. You chew slowly, trying to appreciate the flavors and failing just enough to feel guilty. The sake is already warming your belly, loosening the stiffness in your spine, but also making you aware of how exposed you are alone in a strange inn. Under the scrutiny of strangers and ghosts like your foot brushes something under the matter. Stray pebble, maybe, or a fragment of an earlier traveler's dinner. You leave it there, in this place. Everything has a purpose, even if you're not privy to it. You pick up another piece of something unrecognizable and try to pretend you're delighted. The basin of tepid water now seems like a distant memory, but the dampness still lingers on your palms as you try to act unfazed. You're meant to be composed, grateful even, for the privilege of washing before a meal. Yet the edge of the cloth you used to dry your hands remains clutched in your lap, a nervous talisman. Outside, the rain has slackened into a mist that beads on the woodland slats of the inn, creating the illusion that the walls themselves are weeping along with you. Your host returns with a small lacquered bucket, placing it reverently beside you. When he lifts the lid, a muted puff of steam escapes, carrying the unmistakable scent of rice that is neither entirely fresh nor entirely spoiled. He gestures with a precise dip of his head. This is yours to portion, to share, to prove you are civilized enough to do it without complaint. The woman in the faded kimono appears again, holding a folded towel. You blink at it, and she unfolds it wordlessly, laying it beside the bucket. This, apparently, is your washing rituals on core performance. You are to clean your hands again before touching the rice ladle, as though that basin of lukewarm water had never existed. You comply, dipping your fingers into a smaller bowl. She sits down and rubbing them together, feeling the chill creep up your wrists. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so are your chances of getting through this meal without being reminded of your inferiority. You dry your hands on the towel, which smells faintly of vinegar. Then take up the ladle. It is heavier than you expect. A short-handled scoop, polished, smooth from decades of diners who probably knew how to wield it with more grace. You attempt to lift a portion into the little wooden bowl at your place. A few grains slip over the side and cling to your damp fingers. You want to flick them away, but remember just in time that nothing here is done casually. Every gesture must be deliberate, a performance of restraint and respect. You scrape the stray rice back into the bowl and bow your head as if to apologize to the gods of hospitality. Historians still argue whether this formality was rooted in true reverence or simply a convenient way to enforce hierarchy at every meal. Regardless, you feel yourself shrinking into your borrowed dignity, trying to become as small as possible while you range your bowl, chopsticks, and cup into a semblance of order. The woman steps back, her expression unreadable. You think she might approve of your effort, or she might be silently tallying every mistake to recount later. Either way, she is gone again, slipping behind the painted screen to tend to some other obligation, leaving you alone with your doubts and the cooling rice. The tatami under your knees feels harder by the minute. You try to shift discreetly, but the mat creaks in protest, a loud, disapproving sigh that seems to echo off the walls. You imagine that crane on the scroll behind you tilting its head in judgment, silently critiquing your posture. You remind yourself that this is dinner, not a trial. But as you lift the first small bite of rice to your mouth, you feel the weight of expectation pressing down on your shoulders. It tastes neutral, bland. A soft platform for whatever other flavors await. You swallow and set the bowl down carefully, pretending you are savoring something profound. A warm breeze slides in through the half-open shoji screen, stirring the hanging scrolls and lifting a corner of your damp tunic. Remember that tunic? Still clinging to you like an uninvited memory of all the places you've been and all the baths you didn't take. You consider shrugging it off. But propriety insists you remain swaddled in your discomfort. Your host reappears carrying a tray of utensils lacquered chopsticks, a wooden spoon, and a flat paddle you have no idea how to use. He sets them down in front of you without commentary, though the slight narrowing of his eyes suggests he's silently daring you to pick wrong. You reach for the chopsticks, because at least you've seen them in action. They feel slick in your hands, light and traitorous. You test their grip on a stray grain of rice, which slides free as if delighted by your incompetence. You try again, this time securing the morsel just long enough to bring it to your mouth. Victory tastes faintly of vinegar and embarrassment. A cough from somewhere behind the partition makes you freeze mid-bite. You half expect someone to step forward and correct your technique. When no one does, you finish chewing and set the chopsticks down with exaggerated care. Your heart is beating faster than it should, as though this meal is a stealth examination. In a way, it is. Every motion here is freighted with meaning. Whether you lift your bowl or leave it on the mat, whether you finish each portion or allow a respectful trace to remain, all of it will be read, interpreted, possibly gossiped about later. You wonder if you'll ever understand all the rules. Historians can't even agree on them. The host departs again, returning a moment later with a shallow dish of pickled burdock root. Its color is the deep brown of old varnish, its scent sharp, enough to clear your sinuses. You know you are meant to eat it, between bites of rice to cleanse your palate. You also know it will taste like the earth itself, and you'll have to pretend it's delicious. You take a sliver between your chopsticks and bring it to your lips. The first chew is a shock, sour, fibrous, determined to lodge itself in your teeth. You force a swallow and follow it with a sip of sake, which smooths the flavor only slightly. A warmth spreads through your chest, and you decide to cling to that feeling instead of the lingering taste. Remember that damp cloth from your washing ritual. You press it now to your lips, as if to hide your expression from any hidden observers. The cloth is nearly dry, but it still smells faintly of vinegar and wood smoke. You draw in a deep breath, then lower it to your lap, pretending this moment is one of quiet reflection rather than grim endurance. From somewhere behind you comes the rattle of another tray being prepared. You know you're far from finished that. This meal is an unfolding ordeal, each course a test of your patience, humility, and appetite. You think of your modern kitchen, your microwave that never judges, your refrigerator stocked with predictable comforts. You suspect you'll never take it for granted again. A faint tremor runs through your hands as you reach for your cup. You tell yourself it's just the cold, but you know better. It's the strain of trying to belong in a place that feels determined to prove you never will. You watch the host slip behind the screen once more, leaving you to contemplate the precarious little mountain of bowls and cups accumulating around you. The tatami beneath you, already flattened by countless bodies, seems to be sinking further under the weight of your indecision. You shift your legs, hoping to find a less punishing ankle for your knees. The movement draws a quiet groan from the mat, a creaking complaint that somehow sounds personal. Your eyes wander to the lacquered tray that's been placed just out of your immediate reach, as if the server wanted you to consider whether you deserve the contents. You reach for it with a practiced slowness, lifting the corner to reveal an arrangement of small plates in graduated sizes. Each one bears something more enigmatic than the last, a tiny coil of seaweed glistening with brine, a single salted plum, shriveled almost beyond recognition, a triangle of cold tofu crowned with a shred of pickled ginger. You know instinctively that these offerings are to be approached with caution. You are seated cross-legged well. You are attempting to be on a floor that doesn't care whether your ankles have gone numb. The damp tunic clings more tightly every time you lean forward, its fabric determined to become your second skin. Remember that damp tunic. You're going to miss it someday, when it's replaced by something even less comfortable. You pick up the cold tofu, which quivers in your chopsticks like an anxious jellyfish. The first bite is so bland it feels like you've swallowed a sigh. Yet here, blandness is a sign of refinement, a deliberate contrast to the pungent saltiness of pickles and fermented fish. You try to appreciate it. Try to look as if your soul has been momentarily uplifted by this mild cube of protein. Historians still argue whether feudal Japanese diners were truly savoring the subtlety or simply resigned to it because spices were too expensive to waste on common meals. You suspect the latter, but you'll never admit it out loud. Not with that crane on the scroll behind you, still looming in silent judgment. The host returns, carrying a tall flask of warm sake that he places on the tray with a soft thump. He doesn't speak, doesn't even meet your eyes. He simply refills your cup with a practiced pour that suggests you will need fortification for what comes next. You sip the sake, feeling the heat blossom in your chest. It chases away the chill that has been clinging to your fingers, but it also magnifies the sense that you're being observed. A couple seated further along the tatami floor murmurs to each other, casting you the occasional sideways glance. Perhaps they find your cautious sampling of each dish entertaining. Perhaps they're simply grateful that someone else is the evening spectacle. Your legs have gone from pins and needles to outright complaint. You unfold them with painstaking slowness, easing your knees forward until you're kneeling instead of cross-legged. This earns you a raised eyebrow from the woman in the faded kimono, who has returned with yet another tray. She sets it before you with the same measured grace she's displayed all evening, her expression as unchanging as the lacquered bowls themselves. On this new tray sits a shallow dish of what appears to be small fish, their glazed eyes staring blankly upward. The fish arranged in a fan, each one no longer than your middle finger, each lacquered with a sweet glaze that gleams in the lamplight. You know you're meant to eat them whole, heads and all. You also know you'll be remembering this moment, in the middle of some future night, wondering why you ever agreed to taste something that looks so determined to stare back. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so are these fish. So you suppose you're even. You lift one by the tail, feeling the brittle body bend in your grip. It crunches between your teeth with a sound that makes you want to look round, just to see if anyone else noticed. They did. You can feel it. You swallow as quickly as you dare. Then chase the sweetness with another sip of sake. The warmth spreads, blowing the edges of your self-consciousness. You think, for a moment, that you might actually be getting the hang of this. Then the woman lifts the lid from the last bowl on her tray, revealing a pale soup dotted with green scallions and something that looks suspiciously like a gelatinous cube. You are expected to be delighted by this final flourish. You are expected to bow your head in gratitude. So you do, though in your heart you feel only the resigned acceptance that this is your life now series of opaque rituals, each more baffling than the last. You take up the wooden spoon and dip it into the broth. The surface shivers as the spoon passes, releasing a wave of steam that smells faintly of fish stock and miso. You sip, and the warmth coats your tongue in a way that is almost comforting, almost. The cube, however, remains. It bobs just beneath the surface, daring you to investigate. You prod it with the tip of your spoon, noting the way it wobbles without dissolving. Remember that cold tofu. This is its more menacing cousin. You scoop the cube up and examine it as discreetly as you can manage. It's translucent, pale as a cloud. You imagine it was once part of some unfortunate sea creature, now reduced to a textural challenge. You bite, and the gelatin gives way with a slick surrender that makes you question your choices. The couple down the mat from you has stopped murmuring. They are definitely watching now. You can't blame them, you'd watch too. You set the spoon back into the bowl, your hands trembling just slightly. The host gives a small nod, which you choose to interpret as approval, though it could just as easily be relief that you didn't fling the gelatin across the room. You wipe your mouth with the vinegar-scented cloth, breathing slowly to steady yourself. The sake is doing its work, softening the edges of your embarrassment, dulling the ache in your knees. You think of home, of your familiar kitchen, of meals that never required you to perform small acts of courage. Outside, the rain has begun again, soft but insistent. You imagine it tapping its fingers against the eaves in solidarity, reminding you that discomfort is the oldest human experience. You glance at the little fishtails still scattered across the tray and wonder whether you'll ever stop feeling like an imposter. Historians still argue whether travelers in feudal Japan felt the same persistent insecurity you do. Now, some claim they reveled in the formality, relished the way every gesture declared their place in the world. You suspect they didn't have to eat gelatinous cubes while strangers stared. You straighten your back, lifting your cup in a silent toast to the possibility that you might survive the next course. You sip slowly, savoring the small victory of having made it this far without dropping anything yet. You place the empty cup on the tray with a care that borders on superstition. Every object here feels like it has the power to betray you. A slight tilt, a faint clatter, and you'll be exposed again. As the outsider you are, the host notices your emptied cup and moves to refill it. A quiet ritual that makes you feel simultaneously honored and exhausted. You bow your head as the warm sake rises nearly to the rim. You've learned by now to drink it in slow, measured sips, to fast, and you'll signal greed, to slow, and you risk offending your host. There is no correct pace, only the ongoing, Performance. The woman in the faded kimono appears once more, gliding over the tatami with the patience of someone who has perfected this dance 1,000 times in her hands. She holds a low-lacquered tray bearing what looks like a small mountain of pickled vegetables. The colors are delicate but unpromising muted greens, sullen yellows, the pale translucence of radish slices almost thin enough to see through. She kneels beside you, placing the tray at the edge of your reach. You notice how she angles it precisely, so the tallest mound faces you head on, as if challenging you to begin. You feel your throat tighten in a way that has nothing to do with hunger. This is the first course proper and introduction to the evening's many demands. You gather your composure, which is about as sturdy as the wobbly lacquered tray, and pick up your chopsticks. They still feel too light, too slippery in your hand. You aim for the safest looking vegetable, something pale and leaf-like, and manage to lift it without incident. It tastes sharply of vinegar, each bite a small reprimand. Remember that damp tunic. It's still hugging your back, absorbing every draft from the doorway. You swear the cloth is growing heavier, drinking in the night air like a sponge determined to cling to you forever. You chew methodically, hoping that if you look serene enough, your body will follow. A gust of wind slides under the shoji screen, carrying the scent of damp earth for an instant. You wish you could stand and follow it outside, just to taste fresh air unsullied by brine and smoke. But you are anchored here by obligation, by the quiet certainty that any escape attempt would be less dignified than simply injuring. Historians still argue whether feudal diners truly relished these pickled assortments or merely pretended to appreciate them out of deference. You suspect the latter, but you make a show of nodding slightly after each bite, as if savoring hidden notes of flavor. You wonder whether anyone in the room is convinced. The host is watching you again, not rudely, never rudely, but with a level, expectant gaze of someone whose livelihood depends on your approval. Or perhaps he's simply making sure you don't choke on the pickles and ruin the evening's illusion of civility. Either way, you feel the weight of it as you lift another slice. This one a crisp curl of burdock root that tastes like it was harvested the day the inn was built. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is your pride. The sake helps, smoothing the sharp edges of each unfamiliar taste. Loosening the tight knot behind your ribs, you sip again, and for a moment, you almost believe you're blending in. Almost. The woman returns with a smaller disher cold, glistening mass that proves to be a tangle of seaweed. It looks deceptively delicate, like green lace ranged in a loose knot. You brace yourself before tasting it, telling yourself you are capable of dignity even now. The texture is an unsettling combination of slipperiness and crunch. You chew as little as possible before swallowing, then set the chopsticks down with hands that feel like they no longer belong to you. A soft sigh escapes your lips, unbidden, and you look round quickly to see if anyone noticed. Of course they did. Remember, that crane on the scroll, still standing on its single leg, still more graceful than you will ever be. You imagine it whispering a silent judgment each time you shift your weight or fumble your chopsticks. The host clears his throat, and you look up in time to see him placing a small bowl of white radish near your elbow. The slices are paper thin, arranged like the petals of a pale flower. You know you should admire the precision of it. Instead, you feel only the dull weariness of someone who understands there is no end to this sequence of chow. Edges, you lift a slice and fold it carefully against your tongue. It tastes cool, slightly sweet, a momentary reprieve before the next test. You close your eyes as you chew, letting the quiet of the room wrap itself around you like a too-tight blanket. Outside, the rain resumes its slow percussion on the eaves, the rhythm almost soothing. You take another sip of sake, letting the warmth Chase away the cold that's crept into your spine. The sensation is fleeting, but you cling to it anyway. Historians still argue whether such meals were meant to be an ordeal or a celebration, whether they were designed to humble you or elevate you. You suspect it's both, and tonight you are the evidence. The woman in the faded kimono leans in to clear away the empty dishes. Her movements are precise, each gesture a lesson in the art of not making noise. You watch her hands, steady as river stones, and wonder if you'll ever master that composure. The lacquered tray is bare now, and you exhale a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. But you're not naive enough to think this is over. You know the next course is already being prepared, waiting in some darkened corner of the kitchen. You shift again, feeling your legs protest. But our Tommy seems to grow harder each time you move, as though it's determined to mold you into submission. You rest your hands in your lap, feeling the faint tremor that tells you this meal is becoming a kind of trial. You look down at the sake cup, considering another sip, and why not? You lift it, feeling the warmth seep into your palms. Drink slowly. For a moment, you imagine you're anywhere else home, maybe, with a microwave dinner that never demanded such discipline. But the illusion passes as quickly as it came. You set the cup down, steadying your breathing. The door slides open again. Another tray, another test. You straighten your spine, resigning yourself to whatever comes next. Up the door glides open in that same measured way, a soft wooden sigh that feels almost rehearsed. The woman appears, this time bearing a tray so small you wonder if it could possibly warrant this much solemn ceremony. She kneels to set it before you, her eyes flicking to your sake cup to ensure you're suitably softened. You are, in fact, you suspect you'd accept nearly anything right now if it meant appearing gracious. Your gaze drifts to the tray's single dish, a shallow bowl of what looks like cloudy broth flecked with green onions and something that might be slivers of fish. Floating in the center is a thin wafer of seaweed, cut into a perfect circle as if to remind you that nothing here is accidental. You have the impression that this humble-looking soup has been prepared to test you in ways you can't yet imagine. Remember that cold tofu from earlier. This is the same lesson. In liquid form, humility in a bowl. You bow your head a fraction and lift the lacquered spoon, feeling the familiar anxiety that your trembling hand will betray you. The broth smells clean, if a little briny, and when you sip, it slides across your tongue with the faint sweetness of simmered fish bones. You take another sip, slowly, as if you have nowhere else in the world to be, which is almost true. A hush settles over the room, as though even the other diners sense this is a moment of quiet entrance. You try not to look up, but you can feel them around you, silent witnesses to your small struggle. You swallow, set the spoon down, draw a breath that tastes of old timber and damp cloth. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is your faith that dinner is ever really finished in this place. You can't help picturing your kitchen back home, your electric kettle, your plastic measuring cups, all the conveniences that never once demanded you perform a ceremony. The woman reaches out and turns the bowl a precise quarter turn so the wafer of seaweed now faces you directly. Historians still argue whether this was a gesture of hospitality or a subtle rebuke for failing to align it yourself. Either way, you bow again, though the motion feels more like surrender. You lift the spoon, scoop up the wafer with exaggerated delicacy, and let it rest against your tongue. It dissolves slowly, tasting of salt and a faint bitterness you can't quite name. You chew carefully, aware at this moment this quiet resignation is exactly what the ritual demands. When you look up again, the woman is gone, vanished behind the screen without a sound. The host reappears almost immediately, carrying a squat ceramic bottle that he sets next to your sake flask. He doesn't explain, but the implication is clear. The sake must be replenished, or the evening can't proceed. You tilt your cup toward him, and he fills it without haste. Watching the clear liquid rise until it nearly spills, you lift it in a small, silent toast to your own persistence. A lull settles over the room. For a few breaths, you let your shoulders relax. The rain has faded to a damp hush, no longer drumming so insistently against the roof. You might almost believe you've earned a moment of peace. Almost. But then, as though conjured by your fragile hope, the woman returns bearing another tray. This time, the lacquer gleams darker, the dishes more varied. You count them without meaning to 1, 2, 3, for separate plates ranged in perfect symmetry. You feel your stomach tighten in preemptive fatigue. She kneels again, her hands gliding to set each dish precisely before you. In the first, thin slices of something pale and firm, glistening under a thin drizzle of soy. In the second, a cluster of tiny mushrooms crowned with a tangle of finely shredded daikon. In the third, translucent slices of what might be yellowtail, their edges curling with delicate freshness. The last holds a heap of something darker, perhaps arranged in a spiral that suggests the cook was both patient and slightly vindictive. Remember that damp tunic, still wrapped round you like a reminder that comfort is for other people. You shift on the tatami, feeling each ridge of the mat press into your ankles, the faint chill of the floor slowly leaching upward. You pick up your chopsticks and hover over the mushrooms. They look the least threatening, but you suspect appearances have deceived you before. You lift a small cluster, trying to steady your hand, and place it in your mouth. The texture is soft, almost spongy, and the flavor bursts across your tongue in an earthy rush that makes you blink. Historians still argue whether these delicate side dishes were meant to nourish or simply prove you understood the unspoken language of feudal hospitality. You swallow, and for a moment, you think you can taste the centuries layered in each bite. The host stands watching, his face as inscrutable as ever. You feel a flush rise in your cheeks, part sake, part the low-grade embarrassment that never quite leaves you here. You try to imagine the diners of centuries past. Did they feel this same polite exhaustion, or did they embrace it, finding comfort in the ritual? You move on to the slices of pale fish. They yield beneath your teeth with a soft, almost buttery smoothness, leaving behind the cool sweetness of the sea. You chew slowly, determined to at least appear composed, and set the chopsticks down. You notice how your hand trembles slightly as it returns to your lap. A breeze curls across the floor, stirring the scroll behind you. You glance over your shoulder, half expecting the crane to nod in judgment, but it remains still, forever balanced on its single leg, forever more dignified than you dot meanwhile. Your phone is dead, but so is any illusion that this is only dinner. It's a lesson, a test, and maybe even a penance for every easy meal you've ever taken for granted. You lift your cup again, savoring the familiar warmth as it slides down your throat. The sake makes everything a little soft around the edges, your doubts, your weariness, even your sense of self. You can almost imagine you belong here, just another traveler paying respects to the elaborate choreography of supper. When you set the cup down, the woman has returned, gliding in to collect the empty bowls. You watch her hands, steady and graceful, and think how you might spend a lifetime learning to move that way. But tonight, you'll settle for not dropping anything. She gathers the lacquered dishes in a neat stack, her expression never wavering, and slips away again. The room exhales round you. The rain starts up once more. You close your eyes and breathe in the mingled sense of soil, sake, and old wood, letting them settle in your lungs like a memory you'll never quite escape. The tatami shifts beneath you as you shift your weight, trying to coax a little circulation back into your numbed legs. The quiet round you is almost theatrical, punctuated only by the dull percussion of rain on the eaves and the occasional clink of ceramic somewhere behind the partition. You glance down at the neat ray of empty dishes, feeling both relieved and apprehensive. If experience has taught you anything, it's that an empty tray here is never the end, it's simply an intermission. Sure enough, the door slides open again, and the woman in the faded kimono reappears. She carries a lacquered container with both hands, lifting it high enough that you can see steam drifting from the edges. A hush settles over the room as she kneels. Placing it directly in front of you, the lid is polished to a deep gloss. So perfect you catch your own reflection or weary face, tinged with the flush of sake and the dull sheen of resignation. With an artful motion, she removes the lid and sets it aside. A soft cloud of fragrant steam billows upward, carrying the familiar scent of rice mingled with something rich and aroma that suggests tonight's main offering has finally arrived. The communal rice pot, the heart of every meal, glows with quiet importance in the dim light. You swallow, feeling a small flicker of gratitude for something so recognizably plain, at least until you notice the garnishes, a sprinkling of sesame seeds, a hint of pickled plum at the side, and a thin drift of shredded nori resting on the grains like a delicate accusation. You sense that even the rice here is a test of your ability to appear appreciative. Remember that. Damp tunic, still stuck to your back, as stubborn as your lingering doubt that you'll ever truly understand these customs. You glance round the room, wondering if any other diner feels as out of place as you. But everyone else is bent over their bowls, with the serene concentration of seasoned travelers. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is your memory of any meal that wasn't preceded by elaborate choreography. You take up the ladle, feeling its smooth handle warm against your palm. With all the precision you can muster, you scoop a portion into your wooden bowl. A few grains scatter across the tray. Clinging to the lacquer as though determined to betray, you sweep them back into the pot, hoping your host hasn't seen. Historians still argue whether the rituals around serving rice were truly about respect or simply about reinforcing hierarchy. You suspect it's both politeness with a sharp edge. You lift the bowl to your lips, taking your first bite. The rice is tender, each grain distinct, and the flavor settles on your tongue with quiet reassurance. But laid beneath the comfort is something else, a faint sourness from the pickled plum, a note of seaweed that clings to your teeth. You chew slowly, determined to look as though you understand exactly how this should be savored. The woman sets a small dish of pale radish beside your bowl. You nod your thanks. Though your voice has all but abandoned you in the quiet, she glides away again, leaving you alone with the steam curling upward and the mounting sense that this is the moment you're supposed to feel grateful. You take another bite, letting the warmth spread through your chest. For a moment, you can almost forget how your knees ache, how the damp air has worked its way through your robe, how you've been holding your spine straight for what feels like a small eternity. Almost the room seems to lean in round you, waiting to see if you will falter. You focus on the rice, letting the simplicity anchor you in this small, quiet trial. You set the bowl down, feeling the weight of all the earlier courses pressing against your ribs. Another sip of sake seems in order, and you oblige, lifting the cup with fingers that tremble just enough to remind you how long you've been sitting here. The liquid burns slightly on the way down, but the heat is welcome. You imagine it seeping into your bones, loosening the knots of tension you've tied around yourself. Remember the cold tofu, the gelatinous cube, the fish that stared up at you like tiny, resigned prophets. All of them have led you here, to this modest bowl of rice that somehow feels more momentous than any of them. You finish the portion with slow, deliberate bites. Each swallow is a small surrender to the inevitability of ritual. When the last grain has disappeared, you place the bowl back on the tray, folding your hands over your lap to signal your readiness for whatever indignity might follow. The host appears without a sound, as though he's been waiting just beyond the screen for this exact moment. He regards you with that same neutral expression, then bows just enough to make you wonder if you've passed some invisible test. You bow in return, your spine creaking in protest. Historians still argue whether these gestures were genuine or simply performed to preserve appearances. You think it hardly matters. In this place, the appearance is the reality. The woman slips in again, carrying a fresh tray. You note the new arrangement of bowls, one containing an arrow fillet of grilled fish, its skin lacquered to a dark shine, another filled with simmered root vegetables, their shapes softened by long cooking, and a small cup of dipping sauce whose aroma prickles your nose. You have the sense that you should feel honored by this next offering. Instead, you feel a quiet dread. There is no moment in this meal when you can simply rest, no opportunity to let your guard drop. Even something as simple as grilled fish comes wrapped in the expectation that you will know how to eat it gracefully. Remember the crane on the scroll behind you, still perfectly poised, still mocking your every anxious motion. You lift the chopsticks again, feeling your fingers complain as they curl round the lacquered stems. You take a breath, then pick up the fillet by its edge, trying not to notice how it shed flakes onto the tray. You dip it in the sauce and lift it to your mouth, tasting the crispness of the charred skin and the delicate sweetness of the flesh beneath. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is the illusion that anything here is simple. Each bite carries the weight of centuries, the quiet pressure to conform, to perform, to disappear into the ritual. You chew slowly, feeling the fatigue bloom behind your eyes. And yet, somewhere in the haze of discomfort and ceremony, you can almost taste something like contentment. Almost the last bite of fish leaves a warm trail across your tongue. Mingling with the lingering tang of dipping sauce, you set the chopsticks down carefully, resisting the urge to let your shoulders slump. Every muscle feels bound by invisible cords of etiquette. Tightened with each passing course, you rest your hands on your lap, hoping your body language says something graceful instead of something exhausted. No sooner have you exhaled than the woman reappears, her presence as inevitable as rain. She carries a small bowl, simple pottery with a faint crackle in the glazan as she kneels to place it before you. You catch a glimpse of its contents, a small mound of something dark, glossy, and suspiciously familiar. You recognize it before. Your mind wants to dried river fish, small enough to fit in your palm, each specimen flattened by preservation into a shape that suggests they died surprised. The smell drifts up, faintly sweet and metallic. You know, in your Ameru, that you are expected to eat them whole. Remember that cold tofu, that gelatinous cube, those pickles. You'd almost trade them back for the comfort of predictability. You glance at the fish, their dull eyes fixed on some point beyond this room, and you wonder if they were ever anything but future trials. You lift one by the tail, feeling its rigid little body tilt like a warning. The first bite is crisp, a shattering of brittle bones and caramelized glaze. That makes you close your eyes. You chew slowly, unwilling to admit that it tastes better than you expected. Salty, slightly sweet, an echo of the river it came from. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is any illusion that your palate was ever prepared for this. You swallow, feeling the fragments catch in your throat, and reach for the sake with the calm resignation of someone who has stopped hoping for reprieve. Historians still argue whether dried fish was a delicacy or a necessity, whether diners took pleasure in this salty entrance or simply endured because there was no alternative. You suspect it depends on who is paying the bill. You lift another fish, using the tips of your chopsticks to hold it delicately. You pretend you're savoring it, that you're not imagining your neighbors glancing your way to see if you'll flinch. You don't. You chew methodically, feeling the dry crunch of vertebrae give way under your molars. The woman returns before you've quite finished, placing a second bowl beside the first, a contrast to the first dish in every way. This one is pale, almost translucent, filled with thin slices of pickled radish and a few curls of ginger floating in faint vinegar, a delicate intermission, meant to cleanse your mouth between mouthfuls of ancient river fish. You lift a radish, slice, grateful for its cool crunch. The vinegar chases the salt away, replacing it with a clarity that feels almost refreshing. Almost, you set the chopsticks down to rest your hands. The ache from the effort of never quite relaxing, the tatami, mat beneath you has become a landscape of discomfort. Every shift of your hips presses some new ridge into your skin. Your knees, long past complaint, have entered the quiet numbness that follows prolonged submission. Remember that damp tunic, still there, a second skin you never asked for. A soft cough from the next table reminds you that you're not alone. In your small humiliations, you imagine the other travelers locked in their own rituals, each one balancing hunger, formality, and the slow attrition of dignity. Perhaps they're better at pretending. Perhaps you are simply more transparent. You take another sip of sake, feeling it smooth the edges of your self-consciousness. For a few heartbeats, you almost convince yourself you've become accustomed to this sequence of gestures and silences, the slow choreography of submission. The woman leans in to remove the first bowl of fish, her hands steady, her face as calm as the surface of the sake. She leaves the pickled radish behind, a silent invitation to keep cleansing, to keep pretending this is just a meal and not an education in humility. You bow your head as she withdraws, then reach for another radish slice. The vinegar stings the tender spot where a fish bone scraped your gum, but you welcome the pain. It's a reminder that you're still here, still capable of feeling something besides embarrassment. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is the notion that you can ever again complain about modern takeout. You think of plastic containers, disposable chopsticks, microwave pings, luxuries you never thanked until you found yourself here. Pinned in place by obligation, you finish the radish and set your chopsticks neatly across the bowl, hoping the gesture says you're ready for the next course. A moment later, the host appears, carrying a small tray draped in a white cloth. You watch his hands as he folds the cloth back to reveal a slender plate, on which rests a piece of eel grilled, lacquered in soy, ranged in a neat diagonal. That seems designed to highlight your unworthiness. Remember the crane on the scroll, still there, still balanced, still watching you fail to achieve even a fraction of its composure. You pick up the chopsticks again, noting how your fingers have begun to feel thick and clumsy. You slide the tips under the eel, lift it carefully, and bring it to your mouth. The flavor is richer than you expect, smoky, sweet, dissolving on your tongue in a way that makes you close your eyes. Historians still argue whether eel was a luxury reserved for the well-to-do or simply a seasonal staple. You suspect it doesn't matter. Right now, it is simply the next step in a long procession of discomfort and surprise. You chew slowly, tasting each layer of glaze, then set the chopsticks down again. The woman glides in to collect the plate, her face unchanged. You wonder if she, too, once felt the quiet panic of not knowing how to behave, or if she was born knowing these rituals by heart. You lift your sake cup, feeling its weight as a kind of reassurance. You sip, then rest your hands in your lap, spine straight, ankles numb. You breathe in the mingled scents of vinegar, charcoal, and old wood and tell yourself you're almost used to it. Almost. Your eyes drift close for just a moment, lulled by the slow throb of rain on the eaves and the warmth of sake settling behind your ribs. When you open them again, the woman has returned, her silent rival as unsettling as ever. She carries another lacquered tray, this one smaller, more delicate. As if the meal has decided to pivot from entrance to something more refined though. You know better by now than to expect relief. She kneels, placing the tray before you with the same solemn precision that has accompanied every offering. You look down and see a pale ceramic bowl, the contents hidden under a carved wooden lid. She inclines her head, a signal that you must unveil whatever waits inside. Your fingers close on the lid. Warm from the rising steam, you lift it, and the aroma drifts up to meet you, something rich and faintly sweet, but tinged with a pungency that makes you brace yourself. Inside lies a portion of sweet bean paste, molded into a tidy mound the color of old plum. Next to it rests a small wedge of gelatinous jelly, translucent and quivering in a way that brings back unwelcome memories of the gelatinous cube you braved earlier. Remember that cube? You suspect it was only the rehearsal. This is the encore you never asked for. Historians still argue whether sweet bean paste was meant as a reward or simply a final trial to test a diner's gratitude. You suspect it's a little of both. You pick up your chopsticks, noting how the lacquer seems to glisten more brightly now, as though mocking your fatigue. You pinch off a small corner of the jelly, feeling it resist before yielding to your grip. The first bite dissolves into something delicately sweet and earthy, though the texture is as disconcerting as ever, like swallowing a sigh wrapped in starch. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is the last of your skepticism about how exhausting dinner can be. You swallow, then chase the sensation with a sip of sake that makes the sweetness bloom, briefly softening the edges of your reluctance. The woman watches you impassively, perhaps to see whether you understand this part of the ritual. You offer a small bow, hoping it conveys enough deference to excuse your clumsy technique. You turn your attention to the bean paste, lifting a morsel with care. It clings to the chopsticks in a slow, sticky descent toward your mouth. The flavor is gentler than you expect, honeyed, earthy, almost pleasant until the aftertaste blooms in a way that suggests the beans were left to ferment just a moment too long. Remember that damp tunic, still pressing into your spine, as though trying to merge with your bones. You consider adjusting it, but you've learned that every motion in this room carries significance. You decide instead to pretend it doesn't exist, even as it continues to wake the chill of the floor into your skin. The woman slips away again, leaving you with the silence and the steady tap of rain. You look down at the half-empty bowl, feeling an odd pang of affection for it. It's the first dish tonight that has tried to be gentle, even if it has failed. In the attempt, you lift another bite of bean paste, chewing slowly. The sweetness spreads across your tongue, layering over the lingering salt of earlier courses. For a moment, you almost believe this is the closing gesture of coda at all. That came before. Almost. The host returns with a fresh cup of sake. He refills yours without a word, but you catch the slight narrowing of his eyes, as if he's measuring your stamina. You lift the cup in a silent toast to your own persistence, then drink. The heat drapes itself across your chest like a blanket. Outside, the rain intensifies, a steady drumming that blurs the edges of the world beyond these thin walls. You try to imagine what the road looks like right now, mud slicked into ruts, puddles reflecting the lanterns of travelers still trying to find shelter. You tell yourself there are worse places to be, and yet you can't help longing for something simpler. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is the illusion that you will emerge from this unaltered. You feel yourself softening, the rigid outlines of your suspicion giving way to something more resigned. if not quite content, you finish the bean paste. Setting your chopsticks across the bowl in the precise angle you've watched the others use, the gesture feels like a small surrender. You place your hands in your lap, palms down, and wait. The woman reappears so quietly you almost don't notice her. She lifts the empty bowl with careful fingers, her face unchanged. If she has any opinion of your performance, she keeps it hidden behind the smooth mask of duty. Historians still argue whether these final courses were intended to soothe or to humble. You suspect it doesn't matter, because the effect is always both. You shift slightly on the tatami, feeling each numb patch of skin protest as circulation tries to return. Your ankles throb in time with your heartbeat. You wonder if you'll be able to stand when this is over. Remember that crane on the scroll. Still balanced, still perfect, still watching. You try to imagine what it would feel like to be that serene, to simply exist in quiet elegance. But your knees are telling you there is no such thing as serenity on a straw mat after 3 hours of dinner. The woman bows and leaves again. The silence closes round you. You breathe in the lingering scent of sweet bean and old wood, letting it fill the space where your resistance used to be. You lift the sake cup, the lacquer cool against your palm, and drink. For a moment, the warmth is enough, almost. You set the sake cup back onto the tray with deliberate slowness, partly to signal your readiness, partly because your hands no longer seem to remember how to do things without trembling. The warmth of the drink has pooled somewhere behind your ribs, softening the edges of your apprehension, but never quite extinguishing it. The woman appears again, as if conjured by your hesitation. She carries a taller flask this time, carved from pale ceramic with a narrow spout. You watch her fill your cup, the thin stream glinting in the lamplight like liquid quartz. The sound is almost musical, gentle, steady, a counterpoint to the rain's soft percussion outside. You bow in gratitude, though you feel it less as thanks and more as a reflex. If this meal has taught you anything, it's that gratitude here is expected, even if you can't summon it honestly anymore. She places a fresh dish beside your cup, a small lacquered bowl, sealed with a lid that gleams so darkly you can see your reflection swimming on its surface. You hesitate, studying the bowl as if you might divine its contents by sheer concentration. But you know that's not how this works. This is not a place for shortcuts taught with the same careful hand you've cultivated all evening. You lift the lid. A burst of steam billows up, carrying the faint sweetness of simmer roots. Inside, small cubes of stewed burdock and taro root lie arranged in a neat ring round a single orange coal of carrot, as if to suggest this was all intentional, not simply what was left in the kitchen. Remember the cold tofu, the cube of gelatin. This is their earthier cousin, less alarming in texture, no less insistent in demanding your surrender. You lift a piece of burdock with your chopsticks. It yields easily, soft from hours of cooking, and tastes of faint bitterness mellowed by slow broth. You chew carefully, counting your breaths, counting the seconds until this, too, is just another memory. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is your patience for pretending this is the experience you'd imagined when you first stepped over the threshold. You take another pistero this time. It dissolves into something like paste against your tongue, an odd contrast to the crispness of pickles and the resistant chew of dried fish. You find yourself longing for something simple, something you could name without doubt. Historians still argue whether these simmered roots were cherished for their flavor or merely tolerated because they filled the belly. You suspect the truth is somewhere in between, nourishment disguised as ceremony, ceremony disguised as nourishment. You lift the final piece, the curl of carrot, and hold it a moment before eating. Its sweetness is brighter, a fleeting note of relief, but as soon as you swallow, The lingering taste of taro settles in behind it like a reminder that nothing here is as easy as it seems. The woman appears to take the empty bowl. She bows so slightly it feels like a question. Have you understood? Have you learned? You bow in return, though you doubt you've passed whatever test is hidden in these gestures. Your gaze drifts across the tatami to the painted scroll. The crane still stands on its single leg, as calm and patient as when you first sat down. You wonder if it has ever known discomfort, or if it simply floats above such things. You try to shift your legs without drawing attention, but the pins and needles have returned in full force. Each movement sends a bright flare of sensation through your calves. You stifle a grimace. This is your life now, an endless negotiation with your own body's complaints. Remember that damp tunic, still there, still determined to cling to you longer than any reasonable fabric should. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is the last shred of your confidence that you can predict what comes next. You rest your hands in your lap and wait. The host returns carrying a squat, wide bowl. Its lid is made of carved wood, etched with delicate waves that catch the light. He kneels and sets it before you with a slow exhale, as if to signal that this, too, carries a weight beyond your understanding. You lift the lid. Inside, a clear broth shimmers, broken by a single square of tofu balanced atop a bed of pale green wakame. It looks so harmless that you almost laugh. Almost dot you pick up the chopsticks. Feeling their slender weight settle between your fingers, you lift the tofu, watching it tremble as you transfer it to your mouth. The broth clings to its surface, warm and salty, and for a moment you feel the curious comfort of something that asks nothing of you except that you taste it. Historians still argue whether such simplicity was a nod to restraint or a reflection of limited resources. You suspect it's both. You lower the chopsticks, letting your hands rest on your thighs. The ache in your shoulders is growing, a slow burn from sitting so straight for so long. You roll them slightly, then still, hoping no one noticed. The host pours you more sake, and you lift the cup with numb fingers. You drink, feeling the warmth trickle down your throat in a slow, steady line. For a heartbeat, it feels almost like a bomb outside. The rain has softened to a whisper. You think of the road again slick with mud, silent beneath the steady dark. You wonder if, by now, your own home would feel as foreign as this place. You set the cup down and bow your head. The woman appears once more, gliding in to clear away the last of the empty dishes. The tray leaves your line of sight, and with it, a measure of your dread. But not all of it. Never all of it. You breathe in, and the air tastes of rice and old wood and the sweet tang of sake. You think, not for the first time, that you could sit here forever and still never master the quiet language of this small dot almost dot you. Shift slightly, trying to wake your feet, which have decided to embrace total numbness as their final defense against the evening. Your ankles, your knees, everything from the waist down feels like it has been gently abandoned by circulation. But the top half of you still remembers it has a role to play, and so you keep your spine erect, your hands folded, your face composed. The host reappears with a new tray. Smaller this time, but no less ominous in its perfect arrangement, as he lowers it onto the tatami. You catch a fleeting scent that makes your shoulders tense. Roasted tea, sharp and earthy, layered with something deeper and aroma you can't name, but already know you'll be compelled to taste. He departs as silently as he arrived, leaving you to contemplate the final act of this slow theater. The tray holds 3 small bowls, each a variation on the same theme: liquid, dark, possibly more astringent than you can bear at this hour. The largest bowl bears a lid carved with a delicate chrysanthemum. You reach for it with a care, Of someone handling a relic, lifting it to reveal a thin broth whose surface gleams like polished obsidian. Remember the clear soup from earlier, the single cube of tofu, the wakame drifting beneath it. This is the darker twin. No garnish, no apology. You can feel its scrutiny as you lift the chopsticks. Then set them down again, realizing this is not a dish you are meant to tackle in pieces. Instead, you cradle the bowl in both hands, the warmth seeping through the pottery into your palms. You take a small sip. The flavor is startling roasted, almost smoky, and bracingly bitter. It tastes of something ancient, a flavor that demands attention rather than comfort. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any hope you had that this meal would end gently. You lower the bowl, exhaling, feeling the heat of the liquid bloom. Through your chest, the bitterness lingers, as if to remind you that nothing here is ever merely nourishing. You set the bowl back on the tray, trying not to let your hands shake. Your body feels like it's been carved from damp wood, stubbornly refusing to bend any further. The second bowl beckons, smaller, but no less forbidding. You lift it and find a darker liquid inside. Almost black, the scent rises to meet you burnt. Rice and something like charred grain. You sip, expecting more bitterness, but the taste surprises you. Toasty, almost mellow, the faintest whisper of sweetness beneath the smoke. Historians still argue whether this roasted tea was a gesture of hospitality or a way to remind the diner of their place in the hierarchy and unspoken boundary between host and guest. You suspect the line is thinner than the lacquer on the bowl. You drink again, the warmth deepening, chasing the chill from your hands, if not your spine. You wonder if anyone in the room feels this same slow erosion of certainty, or if you alone are peeling away layers of self-assurance with every sip. Remember that damp tunic, still clinging to your back, as determined to endure as you are. You lower the second bowl, and for a moment, the room seems to tilt just a fraction. Just enough to remind you that sake is as much a test as any other part of this ritual. You close your eyes, feeling the heaviness settle across your shoulders. The third bowl waits, smallest of all. You lift it almost reverently, curious despite yourself, inside. A clear liquid glows with a pale amber tint. You inhale, expecting bitterness, but the scent is mild, faintly grassy, almost floral. You take a cautious sip. The flavor is clean, subtle, a final quiet note after the brashness of roasted tea. It's the closest thing to an apology you've tasted all evening, and you savor it, letting it rest on your tongue before swallowing. You set the bowl down slowly, palms flat on the tatami as you steady yourself. The woman appears once more, her steps as soft as the falling rain. She bows before lifting the tray, her eyes flicking over the empty bowls to confirm you have indeed completed this course. You bow back, though the motion feels heavier than it should, as if the evening itself has settled onto your neck. Outside, the rain has softened to a low hush, like a conversation you're not meant to overhear. You imagine the road beyond the walls, slick with mud and littered with the footprints of travelers who will never know you sat here, performing a quiet surrender to every bowl, every cup, every unspoken rule. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any illusion that you could have approached this meal as an observer rather than a participant. You glance at the crane on the scroll, still poised in perfect balance. You wonder if it feels pity or simply curiosity for the human who can't seem to master the simplest posture. Historians still argue whether these final infusions were meant to cleanse or to challenge, to soothe or to test. You suspect the answer is yes. The woman departs, taking the last traces of the tea with her. You look down at your hands resting in your lap, faintly surprised to see them they're still steady, still yours. You breathe in, feeling the air fill your chest, carrying the bitter tang of roasted grain and the faint sweetness of surrender. Almost. You sit very still, feeling the last of the tea fade into a warmth that makes your head swim just enough to dull the edges of your embarrassment. The quiet round you feels denser than ever, heavy with all the eyes that might be watching. You keep your gaze low, studying the wood grain of the tray as if it might reveal an escape route. But there isn't. There is only the next course, and the next, and the certainty that you will meet each of them with the same polite resignation. You shift your legs carefully, hoping to restore a little feeling to your feet before the next ordeal arrives. The numbness gives way to a hot tingling that makes you wince. Remember your ankles. They are staging a quiet rebellion now, protesting the hours you spent pretending to be a person who knows how to sit gracefully. A rustle of cloth announces the woman's return. She carries a shallow basket woven from reeds, lined with crisp white paper. Nestled inside is a small assortment of sweet spale rice cakes dusted with soybean flour, a tiny wedge of persimmon glistening like amber, and a single chestnut glazed to a dark shine. The presentation is delicate, almost playful. You suspect that's part of the test to see if you can keep your composure while the meal pivots from solemnity to something perilously close. Say to indulgence. Historians still argue whether these sweets were meant to honor the diner or simply to signal that the meal was entering its final phase. You suspect it's a little of both. You lift the smallest rice cake first, feeling the powdery kineko drift onto your fingertips. The first bite is mild, just a whisper of sweetness riding on a starchy cushion. It sticks to your tongue in a way that makes you wish for more tea. But the sensation is somehow comforting, less a challenge than a gentle reminder that you're almost done. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is your disbelief at how something so small can feel so significant. You chew slowly, feeling the last few grains of kineko melt against the roof of your mouth. You pick up the persimmon next. It yields with a soft resistance, the flavor bright and syrupy compared to everything that came before. You swallow and close your eyes, letting the sweetness linger. For the first time all night, you feel something approaching, gratitude that isn't tinged with dread. But the chestnut waits, glossy and inert. You lift it carefully, feeling its weight settle in your palm. When you bite, the texture is dense and almost floury, the glaze giving way to a mellow richness. It's a flavor that feels old, somehow like a memory you can't quite place. Remember that damp tunic? Still there, still pressing into your spine. But the chestnut has distracted you enough to forget it for a moment. You place the last bite back into the basket, brushing stray crumbs from your hands. The woman reappears to collect the basket, bowing low as she lifts it from the tray. You bow in return, your body moving on instinct, even as your mind floats somewhere just outside yourself. You feel the sake behind your ribs, the tea coiling warmly in your belly, the sweets resting like a promise that this is almost over. Almost. The host returns next, carrying a squat jar sealed with a wax lid. He sets it before you with a care that suggests its contents are more valuable than anything you've been served so far. You look up at him, trying to decipher the flicker in his expression, respect, pity, or simply the satisfaction of knowing you've made it this far. He steps back and you reach for the lid, peeling it away to reveal a dark paste. The aroma is unmistakable miso, rich and sharp, laced with the fermented tang of something older than the building itself. You realize this is not a course in the usual sense. This is an offering meant to accompany the final rounds of sake, a gesture that says, you've endured, you are permitted, at last, to linger. You take a breath, feeling the damp tunic tighten across your ribs. You lift a small wooden spoon resting beside the jar, scooping out a taste of the miso. It spreads across your tongue in a slow, salty bloom that makes you shiver. Not from discomfort, though it's not exactly pleasant, but from the recognition that this moment, for all its strangeness, has finally begun to feel inevitable. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is your resistance to the idea that this has changed you in ways you don't yet understand. You take another sip of sake, letting the heat wash away the taste of miso. When you set the cup down, your hand feels steadier. You watch the woman glide past, tending to another diner, her movements as fluid as a crane lifting into flight. Remember that crane on the scroll, still there, still watching, but you imagine. It seems less critical now, more like a witness than a judge. You lean back just enough to ease the ache in your spine. The room feels warmer than it did hours ago. The light softer. The rain outside no longer something you wish to escape. Historians still argue whether the final hours of these meals were about sustenance or about surrender. You suspect it's both. You lower your gaze to the jar of miso, the last traces of sweetness on your tongue, and the cup that waits patiently for your next sip. You breathe in, and for once, the air feels forgiving. Almost, the jar of miso sits between your hands, like an unspoken question. You look into its dark surface, half expecting it to whisper all the things you still don't understand about this evening. But it only offers the same rich aroma, earthy, dense, and compromising. You set the spoon across the rim and fold your hands in your lap, feeling the last remnants of your resistance dissolve like miso into broth. The host appears again, and you realize he is not empty-handed. Balanced across his forearms is a long lacquered plank bearing an arrangement of small dishes you cannot immediately decipher. Each is covered with a lid, so perfectly aligned they might have been placed by compass. He kneels, lowering the plank to rest on the tatami with a reverence that tells you this is the final challenge. Remember the sweet bean paste, the roasted tea. This feels like a coda to everything as slow, deliberate flourishment to remind you that every moment here has been leading to this. You lift the first lid, revealing a tidy square of something pale, almost translucent. You peer closer, realizing it's a piece of steamed fish, draped with a single sliver of pickled ginger. The scent is clean, restrained, as if to caution you against expecting any grand finale. Historians still argue whether these final dishes were truly about pleasure or simply an obligation to completeness. You suspect it's the latter, demonstration that the meal is thorough, that nothing has been left to chance. You take the fish between your chopsticks, careful not to let it fall apart. It tastes faintly sweet, with a whiff of sea errand, a slow dissolve that leaves only the tang of ginger behind. You set your chopsticks down and exhale, the warmth of the sake behind your ribs spreading through your shoulders. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is the part of you that believed you could remain an observer here. You have become part of the ritual, whether you meant to or not. You lift the second lid. Inside, a pale custard glistens in a tiny cup, topped with a scattering of something green. You recognize it as chawanmushi savory egg custard, delicate, enough to collapse if you breathe too hard. You slide your spoon into it, feeling the way it yields with no resistance. The first bite is soft, almost airy. The taste an echo of dashi and a whisper of mushrooms hidden somewhere beneath the surface. You swallow slowly, noting how the custard leaves a warmth behind that feels more comforting than any of the richer dishes. Remember that damp tunic, still there, but you hardly notice it now, as if your skin has finally decided to stop caring. You set the spoon down and lift the third lid. Inside, a wedge of simmered kabaka squash glows orange under the lamplight, resting in a shallow pool of sweetened broth. You can almost feel the last of your skepticism crack. You pick up the chopsticks, lift the piece, and bite. The flesh yields in an instant, sweet and earthy, tasting of something that feels older than the inn itself. The room round you seems to soften, as if everyone has exhaled together. Even the rain sounds gentler, more rhythmic, no longer something pressing against the walls, but a lullaby you have finally stopped resisting. You finish the squash, feeling your shoulders settle under their own weight for the first time all evening. You rest the chopsticks on the edge of the plank and bow your head, though no one has yet come to collect your empty dishes. Historians still argue whether these final courses were about hospitality or about reminding the diner that the host holds the power to both satisfy and humble. You think it's both. It always has been. The woman reappears, her steps so silent you only know she's there. When you catch the movement in the corner of your eye, she kneels, lifting each empty dish from the plank with hands as steady as stone. When she rises, she bows slightly, and you return the gesture, your body moving in a kind of half-drunk choreography you can no longer fight. She carries the plank away, and in the wake of her departure, the space feels larger. You look down at your hands, surprised to see they're no longer trembling. They rest in your lap with a calm that feels almost undeserved. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is the belief that you could ever explain this meal to someone who hasn't sat exactly here. You lift the sake cup, drinking the last of it in a single measured swallow. The heat settles behind your heart, blending with a weariness that feels deeper than bone. You set the cup down, feeling your fingertips trace the lacquered rim one last time. The host returns, bowing lower than he has all evening. You bow in return, your forehead dipping toward the tatami as if by instinct. When you rise again, you glimpse something in his eyes, something you dare to think might be respect. Or maybe it's just relief that you didn't faint halfway through. Remember, the crane, still poised on its painted leg, still the only creature here who never had to pretend. You envy it a little. You sit in the hush that follows, feeling the rain slow tap against the roof, the warmth of sake fading into something you suspect you will miss tomorrow. Almost. You keep your hands folded neatly in your lap, even though every instinct in your body begs you to stretch, to stand, to do something that might restore feeling to your legs. But you don't move. You simply sit, breathing in the soft, exhausted quiet that has settled like a shawl across the room. The woman appears again. As inevitable as gravity, she carries a fresh tray. This one narrow and long, bearing a row of shallow ceramic cups. Their glazed surfaces catch the light in muted reflections, smoky greens, soft browns. A single cup the pale blue of rainwater. She sets the tray before you with a bow so subtle it's almost imagined. You bow in return, feeling your spine protest with a dull ache that has become as familiar as your own heartbeat. Remember that damp tunic, still clinging to your back. Though by now it feels more like part of you than a garment. You look down the row of cups, realizing this is the tea service, the final rite of the evening. Each cup will be filled, set, and acknowledged done unhurried coda 2 hours of ceremony. You feel the exhaustion rise behind your eyes, but you welcome it. It means the end is near. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is your old impatience with rituals. You know now that this is not a meal you can rush. The host returns carrying a slender teapot in both hands. He begins at the far end of the tray, pouring in a thin stream of pale liquid that releases a fragrance as soft as warm hay. You watch the steam rise, tendrils curling like tiny hands reaching for the ceiling. He reaches your cup last, tipping the pot just so that the stream of tea doesn't splash. You bow your head as he sets the pot aside. Historians still argue whether these final cups were meant to restore the senses or simply to keep the diner occupied long enough for digestion to begin. You suspect it's both. You lift the first cup, feeling the delicate heat settle against your palms. The glaze is cracked in a way that suggests centuries of used old blue threaded with fine white lines. You sip, and the flavor is so mild it almost isn't there just a faint echo of grass and warmth. You set the cup down gently, feeling something inside you loosen. Not quite relief, but something near it. The woman bows. Then begins to collect the cups one by one. Each gesture is precise as a ritual blessing. You wonder how many thousands of times she has performed this exact sequence. How many travelers she has watched slip into this same dazed gratitude. You lift the second cup, noting how it's warmer than the first, as though it waited for your hand to claim it. The tea is darker here, a roasted note that spreads across your tongue with an almost smoky sweetness. You swallow slowly, imagining the road outside the door. Washed clean by hours of rain. Remember the crane, still balanced, still watching. But in this final hour you think it almost looks approving. The third cup waits, paler again, as if to remind you the end must be gentle. You lift it, feeling your fingers steady. The taste is almost nothing, soft water with the barest memory of. It soothes the last edge of your hunger, leaving only a quiet fullness behind. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is the notion that comfort must always be obvious to be real. You set the final cup down. Exhaling, the woman appears, her steps as silent as the drift of steam from the empty bowls. She gathers the tray and bows, her face unreadable. You bow back, knowing there is no right way to express what you feel, a mingling of gratitude, fatigue, and something close to reverence. The host returns, carrying a folded cloth that he lays across the edge of your tray, a gesture that says, "You have completed this. You have endured, and in that entrance, you have earned the right to rest." You bow one last time, your forehead dipping low over the tatami. Your body feels weightless and impossibly heavy all at once. Remember that damp tunic, still there. Still, a part of the memory you will carry out into the dark. You look round the room as if seeing it for the first time. The walls breathe with the scent of warm rice and old cedar. The rain has softened to a hush you can barely hear over the thrum of your heart. Historians still argue whether such evenings were meant to humble or to honor. You suspect they never had to choose. You close your eyes, feeling the last of the tea settle into your bones, and for the first time all night, you allow yourself to believe you might finally be finished. Almost. You open your eyes slowly, blinking away the haze that has crept in round the edges of your vision. The air feels heavier now, dense with the mingled sense of old broth, burnt rice, and the lingering sweetness of persimmon. You glance at your hands resting in your lap, surprised to find them steady. Though every other part of you feels on the verge of surrender, the woman returns with one final tray. It is smaller than any that came before, and at first you think it must be a mistake. But then you see the folded square of paper resting at its center, a delicate envelope, sealed with a drop of wax. She kneels to set it before you, her expression as composed as ever. You bow, though your body feels as if it might simply remain bent if you go too far. She bows in return, then rises and disappears behind the screen without a word. You study the envelope, hesitant to touch it. It feels too symbolic, too final-like. The last line in a poem you can't quite understand. Remember that damp tunic, still pressed against your back. Though by now it feels less like an affliction and more like a familiar nuisance you'd almost miss. With a slow breath, you reach out and lift the envelope. The wax gives way easily under your thumb, revealing a thin slip of rice paper folded round a pressed blossom pail, perfectly preserved, as if it has waited centuries to be presented to you. Historians still argue whether this token was meant as a keepsake, a sign of goodwill, or simply a polite way to conclude a transaction. You suspect it's all three. You set the envelope aside, cupping the little flower in your palm. It smells faintly of nothing at all, just paper and the last remnants of rain that must have found their way. Why into the folds? For a moment, you imagine yourself carrying it home, tucking it into a book you will never open again. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is the last fragment of your resistance to the slow gravity of this place. You have become part of the story. However unwillingly, you set the blossom back onto the tray and fold your hands again. The room feels warmer. Or perhaps it's simply that you have stopped expecting to be cold. Your knees are a dull throb. Your ankles might be made of stone, but your heart is beating slow and sure, no longer racing with the fear of doing something wrong. The host returns with a small ceramic bottle and a single cup. He sets them before you, the lacquer of the tray gleaming like oil. He lifts the bottle in both hands, tipping it just enough to fill the cup with clear liquid that smells of rice and thyme. He bows deeper than before, and when you lift your gaze, his eyes meet yours for the first time without looking away. Something in that look makes your chest tighten. Recognition, perhaps, or the quiet knowledge that every guest here leaves a little more human than when they arrived. You bow in return, feeling the movement echo through your tired spine. Remember the crane on the scroll. Still there, still impossibly balanced. But tonight you think you understand why. Balance is not about perfection. It's about staying upright even when everything in you wants to collapse. You lift the final cup, cradling it in both hands. The sake is warm, almost sweet, and when you sip it, you feel a quiet settling inside you, a slow release of everything you've been holding so tightly. You set the cup down carefully. The lacquer cool under your fingertips. The woman appears, gliding to take the tray. Her movements so fluid they seem to belong to another world. You bow once more, and she bows in return. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is your certainty that you ever needed it to feel connected to anything. The host gestures toward the door, and for a moment you think you might cry out of relief, out of gratitude, out of something you don't have a name for. You gather your courage, tucking it around you like an extra layer of cloth, and shift your legs free of the T80 Your knees crack like old beams. You don't care. You rise to your feet. And steady but resolute, the air feels different from up here, less oppressive, almost tender. You bow one final time, deeper than you have all evening, and when you straighten, you catch the smallest inclination of the host's head. You step toward the door, the tatami cool under your bare soles. The rain has quieted to a gentle tapping. For the first time, it sounds less like a barrier and more like an invitation. Almost. You stand there for a moment, letting the sensation of verticality introduce itself to your body. Your knees waver, and your calves tingle with the bright ache of returning circulation. You hold perfectly still, afraid that if you move too quickly, you'll topple forward into the tatami and erase whatever composure you've managed to salvage. The host steps aside, making room for you to pass. You nod once, hoping your gratitude shows more clearly than your exhaustion. The woman reappears, her hands folded at her waist. And together they watch you take the first step away from the low table where you spend what feels like an entire season. Remember that damp tunic. It still clings to your spine. Damp patches now warmed by the body heat you never seem to lose, no matter how cold the room felt. You imagine you'll peel it off later, and it will still carry the scent of miso, roasted tea, and quiet humility. You shuffle toward the doorway, each step an experiment in balance. The floorboards creak under your weight, a hollow, resigned protest that feels almost affectionate. You pause at the threshold, glancing over your shoulder to find the crane on the scroll staring back at you for the first time, it doesn't seem critical. It looks almost like a witness to something you can't quite name, some small transformation you weren't aware was happening. Historians still argue whether the conclusion of these meals was meant to elevate or merely exhaust. You suspect it is both, but mostly it is the simple acknowledgement that you have been fed, tested, and accepted. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any sense that this was just dinner. You feel it now for what it was: a slow initiation, an immersion in a language of courtesy and discomfort you never knew you could learn. The woman steps forward to open the outer door. A draft slips in, cool and scented with wet earth. You taste the freshness and realize it's the first time all night that air has smelled of anything but steam and rice. You bow one last time, hands flat against your thighs. When you straighten, you feel something leave you, a burden of performance you didn't know you were carrying. What remains is softer, not quite contentment, but something shaped like it. You cross the threshold, stepping onto the worn wooden porch, the rain house, then to a drifting mist, each droplet catching in the lamplight like a miniature star. You breathe it in, feeling it settle on your cheeks, and think you might finally understand why people did this for centuries. Remember every course you tasted: the pickles, the river fish, the silent tea. They are all part of you now, stitched into the fabric of this damp tunic and the quiet chambers of your memory. The host bows again. Lower than before, you return it, knees bending with a weariness that feels earned. For the first time tonight, you don't care if you look clumsy. You survived, and that is all the grace you need. You step into the dark, your soles brushing the wet boards. You pause for a final look back, catching the faint glow of the inn through the half-open door. It feels like leaving something behind, something you can't quite name, but that you know you will never entirely shake. Almost. Tonight you've traveled far, in a way that doesn't measure itself in miles, but in all the quiet steps between uncertainty and acceptance. You have sat longer than you ever thought possible, learned more than you ever meant to know, and tasted the softness of humility in each carefully arranged dish. Your body may be tired, your knees stiff, your shoulders a little sore from holding the posture of respect, but your story can rest now. Feel how the rain has eased to a hush, how the chill on your skin is gentle instead of sharp. Each drop is a small reminder that even the longest ceremonies must end. And here you are, standing in the damp night, a little more weathered, a little more aware of how much tenderness lives inside old rituals. Let your breath slow. Let the last sense of roasted tea and warm rice slip away. You don't need to carry them any further. They have done their work, easing you from the frantic pace of your day into something softer, more forgiving. Imagine yourself peeling off the damp tunic, feeling the night air on your skin, feeling the simple relief of having nothing left to prove. You are free to close your eyes now. You are free to be grateful that you live in a time when dinner rarely requires such quiet entrance. Tonight, you have become part of something old and patient, and you have come out the other side. Rest in that small triumph. Let it cradle you into sleep.